He gave 4 women his wealth, but only one spent it in a way that shattered his heart and changed his life forever. In the luxury towers of Lagos, billionaire Nathaniel Greywood was admired, feared, and worshipped. But behind the power and prestige, he carried a burden he didn't know who truly loved him and who simply loved the life his money gave them. So he created a test. He gave 4 women in his life a credit card with no name, no limit, and no questions asked. His gold-drenched girlfriend who lived for the spotlight. His ambitious assistant who spoke like a partner but dreamed like a predator. His quiet maid who never once asked for a raise or a gift. And his own mother, once a schoolteacher, now living in his estate, silent in judgment. What each woman did with the card revealed far more than he expected. One chased fame, one chased power, one revealed secrets. But one woman's selfless choice shook Nathaniel to the core and led him to a truth no wealth could buy. The difference between love, loyalty, and legacy is what people do when no one is watching. The test. No one knew they took. The sun blazed over Lagos like a judgmental eye, hot and unforgiving, painting the skyline in gold and dust. From the 39th floor of Greywood Towers, Nathaniel Greywood stood in his penthouse office, staring out at the city that had crowned him king. Every inch of his home gleamed imported Italian marble, handmade Yoruba sculptures, and floor-to-ceiling glass that kept the chaos of the world at a distance. But Nathaniel didn't feel like a king. Not today. At just 36, he had built SecureNet Africa into a billionaire empire. He had politicians on speed dial, Forbes calling for interviews, and bank CEOs begging for his software. But in his own home, he couldn't shake the feeling that everyone around him wore a mask. His girlfriend Tiara was all diamonds and designer brands, constantly living soft on Instagram. His assistant, Adesua, was sharp and always loyal, but too calculating, too ambitious. His housemaid, Ezine, was quiet, dutiful, and refused every tip or gift he'd ever offered. And then there was his mother, Mama Adora, the matriarch who had raised him with fire and scripture. She now lived in the estate, her silence louder than sermons. That morning, Nathaniel stared at the 4 velvet envelopes on his desk. Each contained a black credit card, unlimited, untraceable, and without instruction. One was for Tiara, one for Adesua, one for Ezine, and one for his mother. 4 women, 3 days, no rules. What they did with the card would reveal what they valued most. And perhaps, finally, Nathaniel would see through the fog of smiles, flattery, and silence to what was real. He picked up the phone. "James, I'm going ahead with the test," he said, voice steady. His head of security responded quickly. "Surveillance is in place, sir. We'll monitor purchases, locations, everything. Discreetly." Nathaniel nodded, then whispered to himself as he looked down at the city, "I've given them everything. Now let's see what they'll give back." Tiara Esimoto was the kind of woman Lagos talked about, envied, and reposted. Her Instagram bio read, "Queen of Soft Life," and her followers hung on to her every outfit, flight, and facial expression. That morning, she met Nathaniel on the rooftop helipad of Greywood Towers, dressed in a champagne-colored silk jumpsuit, lashes full, lips glossed. "Babe, you've been ghosting me, oh," she teased, wrapping her arms around his waist like she was claiming property. Nathaniel didn't return the hug. He simply handed her the envelope. She opened it and blinked, slowly pulling out the black card. "Wait, this is..." she began. "It's yours," Nathaniel said flatly. "No limits, 3 days. Do whatever you want." Her eyes sparkled instantly. She gasped dramatically and squealed. "Are you for real? Is this like a birthday surprise or..." "No," he cut in. "Just enjoy it." She barely heard the seriousness in his voice. Her fingers were already texting her stylist. Before she left, she kissed him on the cheek and said, "Don't worry, I'll represent you well." He watched her walk away like a performer exiting the stage. By noon, Tiara was poolside at the George Hotel in Ikoyi, sipping champagne and showing off her newly purchased 3.8 million Naira Bottega heels on Instagram stories. She captioned it, Reward yourself, Queen. Nobody will do it for you. Hash sponsored by Bay Hash Soft Life Season. That evening, she rented a yacht at 5 Cowries Creek and invited a who's who of influencers, skit makers, and pretty boys for an all-white party. Her tab for the day crossed 21 million Naira clothes, bottles, makeup artists, and 2 new iPhones she gave away for content. Nathaniel watched from his study. His security chief, James, sent silent updates, receipts, photos, posts. But Nathaniel didn't need them. He already knew who Tiara was, a woman who loved being adored, but not necessarily the man who adored her. She hadn't once asked why he gave her the card. She didn't pause to wonder. To her, it was just another stage, and he, just another spotlight, and that realization left a hollow ache where love once lived. Adesua Uma was precision in heels. At 29, she was already one of the youngest executives in Lagos' tech ecosystem, and she wore her ambition like perfume, subtle, yet always in the air. When she walked into Nathaniel's office that afternoon, her braids were tied back, her blouse perfectly pressed, and her tone polished. "Your schedule is clear for the next 3 days, sir. I rescheduled your pitch meeting with the minister's advisory board," she said, offering him a quick glance. Nathaniel slid the envelope toward her without a word. She raised a brow. "What's this?" "A gift," he replied, leaning back. 3 days. No restrictions. Spend it as you please." She hesitated, her sharp eyes narrowing slightly. "This isn't your style, Mr. Greywood." "Maybe I'm tired of my style," he said. She took the envelope, slipped the card into her purse, and gave a tight-lipped smile. "Thank you, sir. I'll use it wisely." And with that, she turned and left, already strategizing. Adesua didn't go shopping. She didn't book a suite for pleasure. She headed straight to the Capital Club, Lagos's most exclusive business lounge in Victoria Island. She arranged private meetings with 3 major venture capitalists and a PR consultant. Using the card, she secured a venue for a Women in Tech forum under a shell company she had registered weeks ago. That evening, she hosted a small cocktail at Maison Fahrenheit, where she spoke eloquently about building African-led startups and hinted that she would soon be launching her own initiative. Nathaniel received the reports with mixed emotions. There was no vanity here, no senseless indulgence. But there was no loyalty either. She was plotting her exit. She had used the opportunity not to deepen her bond with him, but to accelerate her independence from him and his empire. And while her ambition wasn't evil, it stung, because for all her competence, she didn't see him as a man worth building, was just a ladder worth climbing. The morning sun filtered gently through the palm fronds that lined the private garden behind Greywood Manor. Birds chirped softly, and the scent of hibiscus floated in the air. Mama Adora, Nathaniel's mother, sat on the veranda wrapped in a faded lace wrapper, her Bible open in her lap, her eyes scanning the same verse she'd read every morning for decades. She was the quiet storm behind Nathaniel's rise, once a village schoolteacher, now the matriarch of an empire she never asked for. When her son approached, she didn't look up immediately. "Morning, Mama," Nathaniel said, holding out the velvet envelope like it weighed more than gold. She glanced at it briefly, then back at her scripture. "What's that?" she asked, voice calm. "A gift. For you. Use it for anything. No limit." Her fingers rested on the edge of the page. "What's the occasion?" she asked, still not touching the envelope. "No occasion," he replied. "I just want to know what matters to the women in my life." This time she looked up. Her eyes, sharp and deeply knowing, pierced straight through his composed mask. She took the envelope slowly, her hand brushing his. "Thank you," she said quietly. Nothing more. Mama Adaora didn't tell anyone about the card. She simply got dressed in her plain Ankara, tied her gel with practiced hands, and instructed her driver to take her to Ege, to the neighborhood where she and her late husband had raised Nathaniel before the money came. There she entered the Mother of Mercy Community Center, where widows and displaced women gathered weekly. Without fanfare, she paid for the entire next year's rent for the center, stocked their food pantry, and handed sealed brown envelopes to 3 struggling women whose children had been expelled from school for unpaid fees. The rest of the money? She used it to fund a printing press in her hometown of Nsukka to begin publishing children's books in Igbo, a dream she'd carried for years. No pictures, no announcement, just purpose. When Nathaniel received the report, he stared at the summary in silence. 1.7 million naira spent across education, charity, community infrastructure. No personal expenses. He swallowed hard. Of all the women, she had said the least, and yet she had spoken volumes. Her quiet integrity, her unwavering vision, it reminded him why he had ever wanted to become a man worth something. But was he? The black envelope sat untouched on the edge of the kitchen counter for nearly an hour. Izini Okoye had stared at it between slices of yam and flips of the ogi pot, her hands moving but her mind suspended. When she finally opened it, her heart raced. She'd never held a credit card before, let alone one with no limit. There was no explanation, just a small note in Nathaniel's handwriting. No strings. Do something for yourself. NG. That night she couldn't sleep. She paced the tiny servants' quarters, her thoughts heavy. New clothes? A phone? A ticket back to the east to visit her aging aunt? She wanted all of it, but when the sun rose the next day, her steps led not to a boutique but to a rundown pharmacy in Adegun. She used the card to clear the unpaid hospital bills of a neighbor's child who had suffered from untreated asthma. Next, she visited Little Lamp Orphanage, buying fruit, water dispensers, notebooks, and crayons. She didn't tell them where the money came from. She simply said, "God sent me." Later that afternoon, she took a Danfo bus to Yaba, stopping at a small roadside kiosk where she bought a modest sewing machine for a young widow who had recently lost her tailoring shop in a fire. "I can't accept this," the woman had said, eyes wide. Izine only smiled. "Please, use it. Teach someone else if you can." The last thing she purchased was a small bouquet of fresh lilies. She placed them quietly on the grave of Nathaniel's father in a cemetery not far from the old neighborhood. She didn't take photos. She didn't even tell Nathaniel. But the cameras saw everything. When the report landed on Nathaniel's desk, he froze. 214,000 naira spent. That was all. Yet every naira had gone to ease suffering. No self-indulgence, no status games. Just quiet compassion. He leaned back, the ceiling above him spinning. His chest tightened not with anger, not with shame, but with something far more terrifying. Clarity. Tiara had bathed in luxury. Adesua had played her game. His mother had acted with legacy. But Izine? She gave with love, a kind of love that didn't ask to be seen, and it shook Nathaniel in a way no boardroom battle ever had. The dining hall of Greywood Manor was transformed that evening. The long mahogany table shimmered under the glow of an antique chandelier. Crisp white napkins, golden-rimmed plates, and crystal glasses sparkled under soft lighting. But the real tension wasn't in the table setting. It was in the air. 4 women had been invited. None of them knew why. Only Nathaniel Greywood did, and tonight the mask would fall. Tiara arrived first, dressed in a ruby-red gown that clung to her like ambition. She walked in with her phone in hand, taking selfies by the flower arrangements. "Babe, this setup is giving presidential vibes," she laughed, settling into the chair to Nathaniel's left. Adesua followed, crisp in a black pantsuit and minimal jewelry. She sat opposite Tiara, her eyes alert and unreadable. Then came Mama Adora, walking slowly but proudly in a deep blue wrapper and ivory coral beads. She nodded gently to each woman, but said little. Finally, Izini entered in a modest cream blouse and a faded floral skirt. Her presence was so soft it almost went unnoticed until she took the seat to Nathaniel's right, the one no one else had dared touch. A heavy silence settled as the staff poured wine and retreated. Nathaniel stood slowly, both hands resting on the back of his chair. "Thank you all for coming," he began, voice low and controlled. "I asked each of you here because 3 days ago I gave you something many people dream of. Unlimited wealth with no conditions." Tiara blinked. Adesua narrowed her eyes. Izini looked down. Only Mama Adora raised her chin slightly, as though already knowing what was coming. "It wasn't a gift," Nathaniel continued. "It was a test. I needed to know who you were when you thought no one was watching." Tiara scoffed first. "Wait, Are you saying you spied on us? Adesua leaned forward, her jaw tense. You tracked my movements? But Nathaniel didn't flinch. I observed your choices, he said, and in those choices I found the truth. Tiara, you spent 27 million naira on clothes, parties, champagne, and strangers. You didn't call me once. You didn't even ask why I gave you the card. She rolled her eyes. You said no rules. I was just living. Exactly, he replied coldly, living with no regard for anyone but yourself. Adesua folded her arms. And I suppose I failed too, because I didn't buy a bag? Nathaniel turned to her. You were smarter, more strategic, but you didn't act with loyalty. You used my name, my card, and my silence to position yourself for your next chapter without me. She said nothing, just stared. Then Nathaniel looked at Azina. Her hands trembled in her lap. And you, he said, his voice softening. You spent the least. You gained nothing for yourself, but gave everything to others. Azine's lips parted slightly, but she said nothing. You made me feel something I haven't felt in years, Nathaniel said, looking into her eyes. You made me feel seen. A stunned silence fell over the table. Tiara was the first to stand. This is insane, she snapped. So what? You want the maid now? Is this a poverty fetish or something? Adesua stood as well. You could have just fired me, Nathaniel. You didn't need to stage a reality show. Mama Adora stood last, smoothing her wrapper. She walked over to Azina, placed a hand on her shoulder, and smiled. In a world of noise, sometimes it's the quiet heart that speaks the loudest. Then she turned to her son. Now you see, not all wealth is counted in naira. As the three women left, one in rage, one in silence, and one in peace only, Azene remained seated. Nathaniel lowered himself beside her. The firelight flickered in his eyes. You still haven't asked me why I did this, he whispered. Azine looked up gently. Because, like me, you were tired of pretending. And in that moment, for the first time in a long time, Nathaniel felt something money could never buy. Truth. The house had never felt this quiet. The long, echoing corridors of Greywood Manor seemed to breathe slowly in the aftermath of the dinner. The chandeliers had been dimmed, the wine glasses cleared, but one chair at the table remained occupied. Azina sat still, her hands folded neatly on her lap. Nathaniel stood nearby, his body angled toward the door. Yet his heart anchored in the room like a weight he could no longer carry. I thought you'd leave too, he said softly. Everyone else did. Azina didn't look up. I wanted to, she admitted, but something told me to wait. Maybe for the truth. Maybe for the man behind all this marble. Nathaniel let out a quiet breath, unsure whether to laugh or cry. He had spent years building walls out of wealth, yet this woman who owned almost nothing had walked right through them. He gestured toward the hallway. Come, I want to show you something. Azine hesitated, then stood. Together they walked through the corridors past the grand staircases, past portraits of dignitaries and developers, until they reached a door Nathaniel hadn't opened in years. Inside was a small study, untouched by time. No glass, no chrome, just warm wooden walls, scattered books, and a faded picture of his father holding a young, beaming boy him. This was my father's room, Nathaniel said quietly, before the towers, before the billions. This was all we had. Mama would sit right there, he pointed, grading papers, and I'd fall asleep on the rug, listening to them talk about dreams they couldn't afford. Azine walked slowly across the room, touching the bookshelf like it might disappear. This feels honest, she whispered. Nathaniel nodded. I forgot it existed, like I forgot how it felt to be human. Then I watched what you did with the card. No noise, no performance, just kindness. You reminded me. She turned to him, her eyes soft. I'm just trying to be decent. He stepped closer, voice low. The world doesn't need more decent. It needs more you. She swallowed hard but didn't look away, and in the dim room beneath all the marble and power, a seed was planted. Not love yet, but the first warmth of something real. a connection built not on money, but meaning. Weeks passed, but the dinner never left Nathaniel's mind. Something had shifted that night, not just in the people around him, but in himself. For years, Greywood Manor had been a castle. Tall, cold, pristine. Now it began to feel like what it had never truly been a home. And at the center of that quiet change was Azini, the woman who had once dusted the edges of his life without leaving a trace. Now her presence lingered like warmth after rain. The changes started small. Nathaniel cleared the east wing of the house, the one his ex-girlfriends had turned into vanity closets and Instagram sets. In its place, he asked Azine to help design a literacy center for underprivileged children. She hesitated at first, thinking it was just another rich man's charity stunt. But when he insisted on letting her lead, something in her posture straightened. She began choosing books, hiring teachers, even repainting the walls herself. "Not just white," she said firmly. "Let the walls be bright enough for children to feel seen." In the kitchen, the staff was reduced, not out of punishment, but out of respect. Nathaniel no longer needed an army of strangers to serve him meals he never finished. Instead, Azini cooked often, not as a maid, but as someone sharing joy. They'd eat on the back terrace, barefoot sometimes, passing suya and laughing at his inability to peel oranges properly. No one was performing. No one was posing. It was the kind of simplicity Nathaniel had thought he'd outgrown. But now, it felt like peace. One Sunday morning, he found her in the garden, planting rosemary near the edge of the walkway. Her hands were covered in earth, and her face glowed with sweat. "You're up early," he said, kneeling beside her. "It's the best time to plant things," she replied. "The ground is soft." He watched her, then asked, "And what about people?" She looked at him, eyes reflecting the soft morning sun. "They grow too," she said, "if you stop trying to control the light and just let them breathe." Nathaniel smiled, because somehow, without realizing it, he'd started breathing again too. The whispers started small. A blurry photo, a casual tweet, a headline buried beneath gossip about a politician's divorce. But Lagos gossip moves fast, and before the week was out, the blogs were ablaze. Billionaire Nathaniel Greywood spotted holding hands with his housemaid. From butler's quarters to the billionaire's bed, meet the woman everyone's talking about. By the time Nathaniel walked into a boardroom at SecureNet, his name was no longer just on the front page of Business Day. It was trending on Twitter, Instagram, and even foreign gossip sites. The press was relentless. Was Azina pregnant? Was it a scandal? A publicity stunt? Some accused him of manufacturing a humble love story to boost his public image. Others said she must have bewitched him. Nathaniel sat silently in his chair as his PR team tossed suggestions around like grenades. "We can spin this," one said. "Put her through a media makeover. Clean it up." He stood slowly. "She doesn't need to be cleaned up," he said. "And this isn't a story. It's my life." Meanwhile, Azini avoided the media entirely. She refused interviews, stayed off social media, and kept showing up at the literacy center, now bustling with children's laughter and chalk dust. But Nathaniel saw the toll it took on her, the sidelong glances at church, the whispers in the market, the sudden tension from staff who used to laugh freely with her. One afternoon, she stood in the kitchen, washing mangoes, when she said softly, "Maybe this was a mistake." Nathaniel, standing in the doorway, felt the words like a slap. "You think we're a mistake?" "No," she replied, turning to face him. "But maybe the world isn't ready for us." He stepped closer, placing a mango gently beside her. "Let the world catch up," he said. "I didn't choose you for them. I chose you because when I gave you everything, you gave it away to people who needed it more. That's the kind of woman I want to build with. Not because you're different, but because you're the same person when no one's watching." Her eyes filled, but she didn't cry. She nodded. And in that quiet kitchen, far from press cameras and social expectations, they made a decision. They would not perform. They would not explain. They would simply continue. Years passed. The world kept spinning, as it always does, chasing headlines, making kings, forgetting them. But inside the modest wing of Greywood Manor, now softened by children's laughter, mismatched chairs, and the aroma of boiling pepper soup, Nathaniel Greywood told a story every night before bed. Not from a book, not from tradition, but from memory. A story about a man and 4 cards. Their daughter, Adizi, now 5, loved the story more than any fairy tale. "Mama, tell me again," she would whisper, already pulling the covers to her chin. And Azeni, now no longer just the maid, but the woman who changed everything, would begin. "Once," she said, "there was a very rich man. He had cars, houses, and even a swimming pool on the roof. But he was lonely, so he gave 4 women a card. One used it to be admired. One used it to build her name. One used it to do good in silence. And one," she paused, touching Adiza's cheek, "one used it to remember who she was, a mother, a teacher, a builder." Outside the room, Nathaniel Greywood stood quietly, leaning against the doorframe, hands folded, tears in his eyes. Every time she told the story, she changed it slightly, but the meaning never shifted. It wasn't a story about money or about a card. It was about choice. The choice to give, the choice to stay, the choice to build even when no one believed you belonged. The mansion had changed too. What once echoed with silence now pulsed with life. One wing was a women's shelter, the other a literacy center, both funded and managed by the Greywood Human Dignity Initiative, founded by Azini and Mama Adora. The same Mama Adora who once sat silently now taught evening Igbo classes to women who had never learned to read. Adasuwa had since launched her own tech startup and sent an email one day that simply said, "Thank you for everything." Tiara, still in the spotlight, had become a media darling, but something softer lingered in her interviews. A quietness. A hint that perhaps even she had learned something. As a daisy began to drift to sleep, Izini finished softly. And the rich man, he stopped trying to impress everyone. He stopped hiding. He built a life that didn't shine the loudest, but glowed the longest. The little girl blinked. "Was it real, Mama? That story?" Izini smiled. "It's the truest story I've ever lived." Nathaniel stepped inside, kissed Adiza's forehead, then took Izini's hand. No cameras, no clapping, no headlines. Just love earned, tested, and real. The empire he had once feared would fall without power now stood taller than ever because it had been rebuilt with something far stronger than money: trust. And just like that, what began with a test of wealth ended in a home full of meaning. The end. What did you think? What's your take on this story? Do you think Nathaniel was right to test the women this way? And who do you relate to the most, Tiara, Adasuwa, Mama Adora, or Izini? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your perspective. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe for more real, emotional, and powerful stories. Hit the notification bell so you never miss the next one. And please share this story with someone who needs a reminder that love, humility, and truth still matter. Until next time, stay kind and stay real.